Hi guys, my name is Blake, and this is my first video, and I just wanted to talk about something tonight which is called mutual assured destruction, which as a child of the 1960s we all lived with. We did the drills where you had to crawl underneath your desk, not look at the flash, do the trip from where I grew up in Montana from Jefferson School to the bomb shelter in the state capitol, or in the building next to the state capitol, the office building, and do bomb shelter drills to prepare for the atomic bomb. Everybody had, the rage was bomb shelters. You could mail order bomb shelters. People had plans for their own bomb shelters. And the world could go up in smoke at any time. It was like that for, from 1960s to, the 1980s, 1950s to the 1980s. It was a long time. But the premise being is that two sides who are in exchange, in a nuclear exchange, nobody survives. Now, when I went to high school in Kalispell, Montana, we had kind of like the nerd clique that used to hang out by one of the doors. And I had a friend of mine that was a big survivalist, and everything was, being able to survive a nuclear war. And one of those discussions that happened on a regular basis is that, my belief was using Krakatoa, the volcanic eruption, as an example. That was about the equivalent of a 10 megaton warhead. It altered the weather in the northern hemisphere for more than 2 years. It cooled the northern hemisphere. And you're talking about a nuclear exchange where, it's like thousands of, times more material, explosive power being dropped across the earth. It's like having like 1,000 Krakatoas. Nobody's going to survive. That's the deal about it. The the target lists were published, down to National Guard armories. So if you had a radar site, or Montana, we had an ICBM missile site, we had a B-52 base. Warheads are going to be dropping down, on the United States, just like they're going to be dropping down on Russia. And all that material goes up in the air. You have fires, floods, radiated ground that doesn't grow anything. If you use Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for birth defects, post, now you're multiplying that by a couple thousand times. Nobody was ever going to survive. And my friend, who argued for the survivalist aspect of it, that you could survive a nuclear war, later on went into the Air Force, and with that he came into a job where he was flying weather satellites and spy satellites for Strategic Air Command. And one time I got a phone call, and all I was told was, "You were right." And I went, "Okay, what about?" And he said, "Well, I've seen the reports. They're classified, so I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is nobody survives a nuclear exchange." So I went, high school, we were having this conversation, junior high, we were having this conversation in the 1970s. I got that call early in the 1980s. So the Air Force is known for a long time, the Pentagon's known for a long time, that nobody survives a nuclear war. And so how that applies today. So right now we're in a situation where Vladimir Putin thinks that he has maybe an edge with a hypersonic weapon, that maybe they can throw up, an electronic pulse, make a nuclear detonation and give us, an EMP burst that wipes out all the electronics in the United States at one time. Well, that's fine and dandy, but he has to know that it doesn't take a whole lot of nuclear weapons to end life on Earth as we know it. And that he has to be reassured that no matter what, if he engages in any sort of nuclear activity, we're going to respond with nuclear response. It'll be the end of life on Earth, but, that's the way it is. He initiated it. It's on him. You can't be blackmailed into seeding into, Western Europe or Eastern Western Europe, just because he threatens, has a temper tantrum with a nuclear weapon. He has to understand, it has to be made perfectly clear to him that any sort of shenanigan involving a nuclear weapon is the end of Russia. straight up. That's where it's going to be. Now, how that applies to Ukraine, he has to be told, and we have to be firm that he has to leave Ukraine. Joseph Stalin murdered 4 million Ukrainians in 1932 to 1933, maybe another million in 1937 in the purges. He took, 2 million Tatars from Crimea, or anyway, a million Tatars from Crimea, and sent them to Kazakhstan. That whole process of killed a couple 100,000 Tatars. But what's known as Holodomor, was the murder, the starvation by Stalin of 4 million Ukrainians. And the rest, all the dissidents and the revolutionaries, the intellectuals, the artists, they were all loaded on trains and sent to the gulags. So that was the format, or the template for the Holocaust. And now we have Vladimir Putin, who's trying to rebuild the Soviet Union in the name of Lenin, and he's acting like Stalin and going around murdering everybody. He's going to go in there to Ukraine, and he's going to do the same thing. So, it very well may be that Stalin murdered as many Ukrainians as Hitler murdered Jews. And then Stalin murdered Jews on top of that. So what we're looking at in Ukraine is another possible genocide of the Ukrainian people, who have their own language. They're their own race. They've had they've had borders in the past. They have a national identity, and Putin's going to go in there and he's going to wipe out a bunch of Ukrainians again, and people will be murdered by the FSB. They'll be murdered by paramilitary groups that Putin contracts with. And so, how does that apply to mutual assured destruction? You have to define to Putin that this is a police action, that he needs to leave Ukraine or be booted out, but that we're willing to fight, and we're going to fight within Ukraine. We're not going to expand the war. We're not going to, go in and go for a regime change, but Putin needs to leave Ukraine. And if he doesn't leave Ukraine, he will be forced to leave Ukraine. And if he tosses up, I have my nuclear weapon, we do too. No matter what happens, we have enough nuclear weapons to end the Soviet Union and probably end life on Earth, EMP or not. So he has to be told that if that's what it is, that's what it is. But, since we're not going to do that because it's not rational, we'll fight it out in Ukraine. We don't want to invade the Soviet Union, but we just want him out of Ukraine. Now, what happens next? Putin right now is stuck in the mud. He's out of fuel, and he's out of food. It is probably the worst organized mass invasion of a country in modern history. Maybe Mussolini in Ethiopia, I don't know. But this is probably the most embarrassing invasion in the last 50 or 60 years. And he's completely and totally vulnerable at this point. Like I say, he's stuck in the mud. He's out of fuel. He's out of food. And the kind of paper bear that is the Soviet army has been exposed. So if you want to have regime change, you have to incentivize the generals in the Russian army back in the Soviet Union. One of those incentives would be the fact that the army is going to be embarrassed and it's going to get wiped out, because he has a substantial force in Ukraine. He is way overextended. So this opportunity has never presented itself before in history with the Soviet Union, where they are completely and totally exposed and easily swept from the field. So that's what my views on mutual assured destruction are. So I believe that in order to prevent yet another genocide of the Ukrainian people, and they've been through a couple so far, we need to be involved. The opportunity to embarrass Putin and bring about his downfall from the Soviet Union has never been this great before. And then it comes down to the actual moral cause of it. We fought a lot of really dumb wars. This is the war that counts. Putin is no different than Hitler when he went into the Sudetenland in World War II and into Czechoslovakia. He was able to go into France and Poland because nobody stopped him in Czechoslovakia. And his army was sort of a paper tiger as well. It was mainly transported by horses. And because we didn't take advantage when he went into Czechoslovakia, we had World War II come about. So this is the most moral cause. If we do not fight this war, to fight true evil, and that's what Putin is. He's always been a KGB guy. He's always been an evil guy, and nobody's going to negotiate it with him because that's just who he is. The only way that you can deal with a tyrant is to actually face him down on the field. There is only one way to confront evil, and it involves 4 things. You have to turn to it. You have to point to it. You have to call it by name, and you have to kill it. Now, that can be, on the battlefield, that can be economically, that can be ideologically, but you have to face it down, name it, and then kill it. All of the appeasers in the 20th century, all they managed to do was get millions of people killed. There's no dealing with Putin. The only thing Putin understands is force. And you have to demonstrate to Xi Jinping that you are willing to stand up, look evil in the eye, stare it down, and kill it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. My heart is breaking for Ukraine. But, until we have boots on the ground, and wings in the air, I don't want to hear "I stand with Ukraine." Because until we're in the fight, all we are is a witness to a genocide. And I'm sorry this is my first, for any production values here, this is my first video, and I wish all you guys the best, and I hope that we all pray for Ukraine, and we hope that we prevent the next genocide of a people who have been through this much already. Thank you for your time tonight.